Okay, I don't know how I missed this brand new IRS ruling getting rolled out, but apparently it took effect at the beginning of this year. Now, I literally just heard about this last week, and I try to keep as up to date as possible on anything retirement related, so I'm assuming that a lot of you have not heard about this either. So let's talk through this new penalty-free $1,000 emergency withdrawal that you can take from your retirement account. This is Rich Girl's Guide, where we demystify the world of personal finance to help you create a financially successful and fulfilling life. I'm your host, Kirby, and I worked in wealth management for over 6 years before leaving the office to focus on my business and my family. Okay, so let's start out with what this new ruling is. This new rule allows for anyone under age 59 and a half to take a $1,000 emergency withdrawal from their retirement account, completely penalty-free. The Secure 2.0 Act says the withdrawal can be taken when, quote, emergency personal expense distributions for unforeseeable or immediate financial needs relating to necessary personal or family emergency expenses. The reason this is a big deal is because the verbiage is quite vague, which leaves emergency up to interpretation. Meaning, if you are about to default on your mortgage and you deem it an emergency to pull out $1,000 to pay your mortgage this month, that is likely covered as an emergency under this new ruling. I'll let Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Ashley Ebling explain her interpretation of the new ruling.
So there's a specific list, things like medical bills, auto repairs, funeral expenses. But the thing that's really interesting is this catch-all phrase. It just says any other necessary emergency personal expenses. So for someone living paycheck to paycheck, that could mean groceries. It's a pretty broad definition.
Previously, if you pulled out any dollar amount from your pre-tax retirement accounts under the age of 59 and a half, you would incur a 10% penalty on that withdrawal amount. In the case that you are withdrawing $1,000, that penalty would be $100. Not a tiny amount. Now, previously there were a handful of exceptions that allowed you to take a penalty-free withdrawal from your retirement account. Terminal illness, first-time home purchase up to $10,000, and adoption or birth of a child up to $5,000 are just a few examples. The major difference here is that these previous exceptions are for very specific life events, while this new ruling seems to be purposely more of like a catch-all to allow for a wider variety of emergencies. Just as a quick reminder, the Secure 2.0 Act was passed in December of 2022, which is where this ruling originated. Now, according to Wall Street Journal reporting, 2.8% of Americans that have a retirement plan with Vanguard had to take a hardship withdrawal in 2022. While that might seem like a pretty low percentage, 2.8, the pre-pandemic hardship withdrawals were closer to 2% at Vanguard, meaning that in just a 2-year time period, the number of hardship withdrawals rose nearly 40%. Now, again, this is only from Vanguard, but they have a lot of retirement plans and are probably pretty similar to a lot of other financial institutions that hold 401k plans. To me, that number is alarming, but not entirely surprising given the state of the country in 2022. Whether or not the increase in hardship withdrawals led to this new ruling is up for debate, but either way, it will have a direct effect in getting more money into Americans' pockets who are experiencing a true emergency and really need to utilize this new rule. Real quick, I just wanted to pop in and say thank you so much for tuning in today. For my OG listeners, thank you so much for sticking around. We are almost up to 100 subscribers on YouTube after just over a month of rebuilding from scratch. So to each and every one of you who have subscribed, I sincerely appreciate you. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It is completely free and helps me to continue making more content for you. Okay, enough of the sappy shit. Let's get back to the show. Okay, so now let's get into some of the logistics of this new ruling. you will still owe taxes on the withdrawal amount. Just because this is a penalty-free withdrawal does not mean that it is a tax-free withdrawal. Penalty and income tax are two completely separate things. Before this ruling, if you took a distribution from your 401k or IRA before age 59 and a half and it did not meet any of the exceptions to penalty, you would owe a 10% penalty plus federal and state income tax. This is because you are pulling money from a pre-tax account. Remember, pre-tax just means you are forgoing paying tax now until a later date. No matter what age you are, when you go to pull money out of a pre-tax account, you are going to owe income tax. Let's take a look at the $1,000 example. If you're in the 22% federal tax bracket and 5% state tax bracket, when you go to pull out a $1,000 emergency withdrawal, you are going to owe $220 in federal income tax and $50 in state income tax. Now, again, in the case of an emergency, you can choose to pay that tax in April of next year when you go to do your taxes instead of having it withheld from your emergency withdrawal. But the fact remains that you will still owe $270 in income tax for that withdrawal. Prior to this ruling, you would also owe the 10% penalty, $100, bringing your total after tax, after penalty dollar amount to $630. After this new ruling, your after tax amount now totals $730. You also need to acknowledge the fact that you took a hardship withdrawal on your tax return in the year you took the distribution. While I highly doubt you need to explain the nature of your emergency on your tax return, more than likely it will just be like a box you need to check. I would highly recommend documenting what the emergency is, include any applicable receipts, and then keep those documents with your tax return. Seeing as this is a brand new ruling and the first year that the IRS will be seeing these withdrawals is 2024, having more documentation is always better than having less, especially if you get audited in the next few years. Again, always better to be safe than sorry. If you do end up taking this emergency withdrawal, you will need to leave a minimum balance of $1,000 in your retirement plan. So if you only have an account balance totaling, let's say, $1,800, then you can only take out $800, leaving the minimum balance of $1,000. If you have less than $1,000 in your account, my understanding of this ruling is that you might not be eligible to make the penalty-free distribution. Another little nitpicky thing that I found about this rule is that you can only take one emergency withdrawal per calendar year. Meaning if you have a $200 emergency in January and you take that $200 withdrawal, you cannot take an additional $800 withdrawal later in the year penalty free. It's a one and done per calendar year. And last but certainly not least, this is an annual withdrawal amount, meaning if you have an emergency 2 years in a row, you can take out $1,000 this year and $1,000 next year. However, if you take a $1,000 withdrawal this year in 2024 and you do not make additional contributions into your retirement account, aka paying back the withdrawal amount, you will have to wait 3 years to make another emergency withdrawal. Let's go through an example because I know I just threw a lot at you. Let's say you have an emergency this year, 2024, and you take a withdrawal of $1,000. You end up stopping your retirement plan contributions for the remainder of this year, meaning you did not make any additional contributions after you took the emergency withdrawal. If you then have an emergency next year and still have not paid back the $1,000 withdrawal, you cannot take a penalty fee withdrawal next year. In fact, until you make up the contributions, you will not be eligible for another emergency withdrawal until 2027. Now, this only applies to pre-tax retirement accounts, so that would be your traditional IRA or your pre-tax 401k. Just as a quick reminder, you can always take out your Roth IRA contributions at any time, tax and penalty free. Now, earnings on those contributions have slightly different rules. But let's not worry about that. All you need to know is that your after-tax contributions that you put into the Roth IRA are always available to you because you've already paid the tax on it. Again, for Roth 401ks, the 401k plans can be a little bit different. So we're specifically talking about Roth IRA contributions here. So when should you utilize this emergency withdrawal? Well, that's kind of left up to you. Personally, I like to have 3 to 6 months worth of monthly expenses set aside in a high yield savings account, and this is my emergency fund. Now, the idea is if you lose your job or are unable to work for a period of time, then you have a bucket of easily accessible cash to pull from. But this can also be used for other emergencies. Let's say you have an unexpected car expense, a large hospital bill, or some kind of emergency pops up that is outside of your regular budget. You can pull the cash from your emergency fund to pay for the emergency and then slowly put money back into your emergency savings over time to build it back up. If you're in the predicament where you do not have an emergency fund to pull from, or there is not enough cash to cover the expense, that is when you may want to look at utilizing this emergency withdrawal rule. Once you have determined that there is no other option to pay for this emergency, let's make sure that this is actually an emergency. We're not paying for an emergency vacation because we have been overworked and overtired and we deserve it. That's not an emergency. We are not paying for an expensive car repair if we could instead sell the car and buy a cheaper car with less maintenance, or take public transportation if your location and job allows. We are talking about true emergencies. You are about to lose your house. You cannot afford groceries to feed yourself or your kids. You will lose your only source of income if you don't repair your car. Because here's the thing, once you start pulling money from your long-term retirement account, it is a lot easier to pull out more in the future. I saw this time and time again when I worked in wealth management. It was really sad. Somebody would go like 10 years without pulling any money from their retirement account, but one day they have an emergency and would take out a few $100s to carry them over. And mind you, they still had to pay the 10% penalty back then. Now all of a sudden, they seem to have emergencies every few months, taking a few $100 here, now we're gonna take a few $1,000 from here. And after years and years of doing this, they would get so behind on their retirement savings that unfortunately, some of them would just have to close their accounts entirely, and they kind of gave up on saving for the foreseeable future. So don't let that be you. If you have a true emergency and have no other option than to utilize this emergency withdrawal, then absolutely go ahead and use this option. But make sure you prevent yourself from having to do it again in the future. Create and maintain a healthy emergency fund. Create more income sources through a better paying job or getting a second job. Cut down on your expenses so that you can save more cash for future emergencies. Because if one thing is true in life, it's that there truly is just one thing after another. And it is much better to prepare yourself for the inevitable than be caught with your pants down more than once. Speaking from experience. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this something that you will be utilizing, or are you gonna try and avoid this? Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I will have a brand new episode out next Monday. Till then, have a wonderful week. Later, rich girls.